Hi, everybody. I see that some of you are still joining us, but we'll get started slowly. So welcome to today's workshop. My name is Alina Satter, and I'm a postdoctoral associate in the Network for Economic and Social Trends at Western University. And joining me today are my colleagues, Vicky Esses and Peter Salman. Vicky is the principal investigator of P2P, professor of psychology and director of the Network of Economic and Social Trends at Western University. And Peter is a coordinator of the Chatham-Kent Local Immigration Partnership. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that Western University is located on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Lenape-Wook and Chongton nations. And I also recognize that as we are on a virtual meeting, many of you may be also on a different territory. So today we're excited to hold the workshop on promoting positive attitudes towards immigrants and immigration in smaller Canadian communities. So this is the first workshop of P2P's new virtual workshop series. So over the next few months, we will continue to explore various topics every third Tuesday of the month. So we're looking forward to hopefully welcoming many of you back. But today in this session, what we will be doing is that Vicky and I will first present findings from P2P's survey on immigration attitudes in smaller Canadian communities, and also discuss our recommendations based on the findings. Peter will then talk about how Chatham-Kent promotes more favorable immigration attitudes and also a more welcoming community. Each of us will speak for around 15 minutes. So at the end, we will have plenty of time for comments and questions. So we ask that you please hold back with your questions until the very end, and then we will have plenty of time to address the questions. Then you may raise your hand or also leave your comments or questions in the chat at the end of the session. And finally, for those of you who would like to go back to the material presented today, we will make our presentations available on the P2P website right after today's session. So you will have those presentations as a resource to go back to. That's it for the introduction. So I think now we are ready to pull up the slides and get started with the first presentation. So I will start with the first presentation, which is, as I mentioned, on the topic of understanding attitudes towards immigrants and immigration in smaller Canadian communities. And to provide a bit of context for our research, I would like first to review some statistics regarding the number of new immigrants who come to Canada. And I assume, as many of you know, Canada has a long tradition of welcoming immigrants. So since the 1990s, Canada has admitted over 200,000 immigrants annually on average. And then more recently, the government announced plans to progressively increase this number with a target of 500,000 new immigrants by 2025, and then stabilizing at this number for the years that follow. So just also to look at some actual numbers from the last couple of years, in 2022, Canada welcomed a bit more than 430,000 immigrants, and this number rose to 470,000 in 2023. So given this increased number of new immigrants in Canada that have been admitted just recently and will be admitted in the next few years, it is important to work towards a successful integration of these newcomers. And part of this involves also addressing the question of what type of welcome they're most likely to receive once they arrive and settle in Canada. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So the question is, once immigrants arrive to Canada, where do they settle? And what we've seen traditionally is that a large percentages of immigrants settle in large urban centers, such as Toronto, Montreal, or Vancouver. Although data from the most recent census suggests that the percentage of the recent immigrants settling in these cities has decreased a bit from 2016 to 2021. Nevertheless, we see that smaller Canadian communities face challenges in attracting and retaining immigrants, which is particularly problematic as many of them are dealing with labor shortages, outmigration, declining birth rates, and aging populations, and could benefit from increased immigration. To encourage a more balanced distribution of immigrants and to extend the benefits of immigration to smaller communities, the federal and provincial governments have implemented regionalization programs to encourage immigration to these smaller communities outside of the large centers. And these include, for example, the Atlantic Immigration Pilot or the Rural Northern Immigration. So for the regionalization of immigration to be successful, it is important that community leaders and employers use these programs and actively create welcoming communities that attract and retain immigrants. So what are welcoming communities? Welcoming communities have several characteristics. And one of them, which will be more the focus of today's presentation, is the presence of positive attitudes of the established population towards immigrants and immigration. So why are positive attitudes important? So there are several reasons for that. First, they can impact how established residents treat immigrants who come to these communities. There is an extensive body of research that has shown how prejudice and discrimination can have a negative impact on immigrants' physical and mental health. Positive attitudes are also important because they can influence other key aspects of the integration process, such as employment or finding affordable and adequate housing. And positive attitudes are also important in the sense that they can affect the social cohesion of the community as a whole. So if immigrants feel welcome, they're more likely to feel that they belong and that they can participate in the community, and they're also more likely to stay and settle in the community. However, there is limited information on attitudes towards immigrants and immigration in smaller communities. The evidence that is available suggests that attitudes may be less favorable compared to larger centers. So to get a better understanding of the attitudes in these smaller centers, P2P conducted a survey on immigration attitudes in these smaller centers. Next slide, please. So as part of that survey and that research, we had several questions, and some of them we've listed here. So the first one was, how do residents in smaller Canadian communities view the impact of immigrants on their community? Do they believe that immigration to their community should be encouraged? Also, what role do perceptions of control over local immigration and frequency and quality of contact with immigrants play in predicting these attitudes? And also, do demographic characteristics of respondents play a role? And finally, we were also interested in looking at welcoming perceptions. So how welcoming do residents think that their communities are to diverse immigrants? And again, what factors predict these attitudes? Next slide, please. In terms of the method, the survey targeted 11 Canadian census agglomerations and small census metropolitan areas between June and August of 2022. As you can see on this slide, we have a table listing all the communities included in our research, together with information about their population sizes and the percentage of the immigrant population in each community. The goal was to survey communities, smaller communities of various sizes, so with different percentages of immigrants as well, and also making sure that we have communities from all 10 Canadian provinces. For each community, we aim to get approximately 400 participants with specific age and gender quotas to ensure representativeness. And for the most part, we got to these 400 participants by recruiting them through the phone, through random digit dialing, and then once invited, they were redirected to an online survey to complete the questions. Where needed, some of the samples were also supplemented with online panel participants for a maximum of 25% panel participants per community. So in total, our sample size across communities equaled 4,390 participants. Next slide, please. To assess attitudes towards immigrants and immigration in their local community, respondents were asked to answer the following two questions. So first, do you think immigrants in name of the community? So this was adapted to each respondent's community where they were living in. So it was tailored to their community. And they were asked if they think immigrants are having a positive or a negative impact on their community. And they provided answers on a scale from 1 very negative to 7 very positive. And they were also asked, do you agree or disagree that immigration in their community should be encouraged. And this was answered on a scale from 1 to 7, level of agreement. So what were the results? Across communities, respondents on average reported that immigrants have a positive impact on their community. So we have a mean of 5.41 and a range from 5.08 to 6.02. And in terms of the encouragement of immigration in their community, we also see quite positive numbers. We see a mean of 5.36 and then a range of 5 to almost 6 between the communities. Next slide, please. So in addition to this close-ended questions with the scales that I just presented, we also included an open-ended question that asked respondents to describe in what ways immigrants have a positive or negative impact on their communities. So those who earlier said that immigrants have a positive impact on their community were asked to describe in what ways that impact was positive, and the same thing for those who said that immigrants had a negative impact. They were asked to describe, well, in what ways do immigrants have a negative impact. So we received a total of 3,118 positive responses and 391 negative responses. And to analyze these responses, we followed a specific procedure to determine common themes in these responses. So what we did, we had 3 research assistants who independently reviewed all responses and then developed a preliminary list of themes. Based on this review, a final list of themes was established by consensus, which was then used to code all the responses. And the inter-rater reliability was very high for the coding with 95%. Next slide, please. So let's first take a look at the results for the positive responses. So in all communities, the top 2 most frequently mentioned themes were multiculturalism, diversity of perspectives, and filling of labor shortages. So just to give you a bit of a range, 38% of positive responses in Cape Breton mentioned multiculturalism and diversity of perspective as a theme, and up to 61% of the positive responses in Charlottetown included that theme. So in terms of this theme, respondents talked about how immigrants create more multicultural communities, bring new perspectives to the community, through which community members can become more open and learn about other cultures and parts of the world. For example, one person mentioned, as a relatively insulated community, introducing multiculturalism to the community provides more information and understanding of the whole world. The other theme, filling of labor shortages, so we have a range of 28% to 50% of responses in these communities mentioning this theme. Here, again, respondents talked about how immigrants are key to filling labor force gaps. For example, one respondent mentioned, there is a huge labor shortage in all areas of employment, especially in healthcare. I wish there was a way to fast-track doctors and nurses to qualify them for work in Canada. Next slide, please. So those were the top 2 themes. So now let's look at some other themes that were mentioned, other positive themes. One of them was the positive impact on the economy that immigrants have. So someone stated, for example, they are the force or engine that drives the economy of Brandon and this country. Another theme that we found was the mentioning of positive characteristics of immigrants. So for example, one respondent said, I see many smart and hardworking people who want to give back to the community. They're going to higher education to be doctors and social workers to generally give back to Canada. Next slide, please. Other positive themes included the mentioning just of the diversity in arts and culture. So one person, for example, mentioned the cultural diversity of our community has increased, restaurants and social variety of our region has increased, the arts have been revitalized. Another theme was the positive contribution to the community. So respondents talked about how immigrants are involved in the community and give back. For example, one person mentioned they volunteer at food banks and churches, which is very much appreciated, especially with an aging population. And finally, another positive theme was population growth. So respondents talked about how immigrants increase the population size of their communities. As an example, we have the following quote: "The city has felt like it is dying for a very long time to me. More people coming means it will be around longer." Next slide, please. So now let's turn to the themes of the negative responses. And here what we can say as a general observation is that the top two negative themes were not as consistent across communities, so they were more varied. So let's go over some of the most frequently mentioned negative themes. The first one is the failure to adopt and respect the Canadian lifestyle and the erosion of Canadian values. So this theme was a top theme in 7 communities with 22 to 34% of negative responses in these communities mentioning this theme. As an example of a quote, someone mentioned weakening of Canadian and Christian values in the school systems, weakening of mainstream culture, forced indoctrination of other values, beliefs, religions, and language. Another common theme was the negative impact of immigrants, or the perceived negative impact of immigrants on the labor market. This was also a top theme in 7 communities with 22 to 48% of communities mentioning this theme. For example, one response was the following: "They are taking away jobs from people who have been born and based here and cannot find a job because there are so few available." So the competition for jobs. Next slide, please. So another top theme that was mentioned is the perception that immigrants contribute to the housing crisis. So this was a top theme in Charlottetown, Cape Breton, and St. John's. So for example, a quote to illustrate this theme is the following: "There seems to be an influx of immigration here for the past few years, and we're having a housing crisis, plus our economy is bad. They rent and wreck the places they're in, serious garbage issues." Another top theme in the same communities was the concern of population increase, or an increase that is happening too fast. So someone said, for example, "Just way too many, we're not used to this." So concerns about too many immigrants coming for the size of the community, that's just happening too fast, and that the community cannot keep up with infrastructure. Next slide, please. So another top theme was increase in crime, which was a top concern in Wood Buffalo and Kamloops. So as an example, someone mentioned, "It appears that drug-related crime has increased dramatically, and more times than not, the ones charged have a new Canadian name attached to it." And in 3 communities, another top theme was also the perception that immigrants reap government benefits. As someone mentioned, "They have more benefits and programs in our community than our own children and families." Next slide, please. Then finally, another top theme. So we're still looking at the top most frequently mentioned themes. So in 3 communities, Brandon, Bathurst, and St. Hyacinthe, the top theme was insufficient English and French language skills, so concerned that the communication was not good enough. Someone mentioned the language barrier online and in person is extremely difficult, especially in the medical field and other helping professions. Even ordering a coffee is difficult. Next slide, please. Now let's turn to some other themes that were mentioned, other negative themes. We had also responses where negative characteristics of immigrants were highlighted. For example, someone mentioned they tend to be ungrateful for the opportunity this country has given them. Their attitude is, "What can Canada do for me?" and not how I could thank this country for their generosity. Another theme mentioned was also the concern with the lack of qualification and skills of laborers. Someone mentioned, for example, they work for less pay, and how can you prove that they have actually the education that they say they do? Next slide, please. Now, the last 2 themes that also were mentioned as part of those negative responses were taking over businesses and negative impact on education. In terms of taking over businesses, the concern was, yes, taking over businesses and engage in preferential hiring. So for example, someone mentioned they're buying all of our stores, gas station, apartment, etc. and having all the Canadians lose their jobs so they can hire their own. And in terms of the negative impact on education, respondents indicated things such as that immigrants lower the quality or the standard, that they take away schooling opportunities for Canadians, and that they increase the cost of education. As an example, one participant said, they're increasing costs for education because the children need ESL teaching. ESL students take up the teacher and education assignments time. So this is what we found in terms of the perception, in terms of the impact that immigrants have on their community. So the next portion of the research was then focusing on the other research questions that I outlined, and I think Vicky will be leading that part.
Thank you, Alina. So our research also explored what predicts these positive and negative attitudes. And we really focused on two main factors, which, as you'll see, are really important. So the first factor we looked at was sense of control over local immigration, using two items. So how much control do you think that people in your community have over the number of immigrants who are coming to live there? And how much control do you think that people in your community have over the type of immigrants who are coming to live there? From 1, no control at all, to 7, a great deal of control. Next slide, please. The second factor we looked at was contact with immigrants in the community. And this included frequency of contact. So how often do you interact with immigrants in your community? And it could range from never to daily. And then quality of contact. When you do interact with immigrants, is it unfriendly or friendly? Again, on a 1 to 7 scale. And finally, we did also include a variety of demographic variables in our analyses. That is demographics of the respondents, things like their age, gender, ethnicity, immigrant status, education, and income. Next slide, please. So what did we find? First of all, you'll see that respondents reported overall quite low levels of control over local immigration. And this included their sense of control over the number and the type of immigrants coming into their community. Again, on a 1 to 7 scale, the means were just about 2.5. So quite low sense of control. We found that the control over perceptions of the control over the number and type of immigrants coming were highly correlated. So for the further analyses, we combined these two items. In terms of frequency of contact with immigrants, as you can see here, there was quite a bit of variability. Daily contact varied from 28.5% of respondents in Bathurst to 78.2% in Wood Buffalo. And most respondents in other communities interacted with immigrants at least, say, once a week, with a few exceptions, including Bathurst, St. Hyacinth, Kamloops, and Greater Sudbury. What's interesting is that in almost all, actually in all communities, many respondents describe their contact as quite friendly. So a mean of 5.85 across communities. Next slide, please. Now turning to how these perceptions of control and contact predict attitudes toward immigrants and immigration in the local community. First, in terms of the question of whether immigrants are having a positive or negative impact on their community, respondents were more likely to view immigrants as having a positive impact on their community if they perceived more control over local immigration and they experienced friendlier contact with immigrants. So control is important, and then the quality of the contact is important. We also found a number of demographic variables predicting perceived impact. So respondents who were older, female, foreign-born, and those who had a higher degree or higher income viewed immigrants' impact more positively. And one thing that's interesting, and you'll see this over and over again, is that it's often the case that younger people have more positive perceptions, but in this case, it's quite consistently the case that older people who perhaps have a sense of, the future of their community are more likely to have a more positive view of the impact of immigrants. In terms of the question of whether immigration to the local community should be encouraged, the results were again similar. So again, respondents were more likely to agree that immigration to their community should be encouraged if they perceived more control over local immigration and they experienced friendlier contact with immigrants. And also, once again, those who were older, those who were foreign born, had a higher degree, higher income, were more likely to agree that immigration to the community should be encouraged. Now, respondents were also asked how welcoming their communities were to immigrants. So they were asked about immigrants in general, immigrants who were not white, and immigrants who are not Christian. And they saw their communities as quite welcoming of immigrants in general, but as somewhat less welcoming of racialized immigrants and of immigrants who are not Christian. And this is across communities. Next slide, please. And in terms of predicting these perceptions of how welcoming their communities are, respondents are more likely to perceive their communities as welcoming to immigrants in general, welcoming to racialized immigrants, and welcoming to immigrants who are not Christian if they perceived, again, more control over local immigration and experienced friendlier contact with immigrants. It's also the case across the three measures that we found that respondents who were older were more likely to see their communities as welcoming. So again, you can see that perceptions of control and perceptions of the friendliness of contact are really important here. So to summarize our findings today and consider the implications, on average, residents in these smaller communities viewed immigrants as having quite a positive impact on their communities, such as filling labor shortages, promoting multiculturalism, and most support further immigration. However, some did view the impact of immigrants as negative and mentioned concerns such as the weakening of Canadian values, competition for jobs, exacerbation of the housing crisis, overly rapid population increase that their community wasn't ready for, an increase in crime, and taking government benefits. And residents did perceive their communities as being quite welcoming to immigrants in general, although less so for racialized and non-Christian immigrants. So feeling a very low level of control over local immigration predicted more negative attitudes toward immigrants and immigration to the community and less welcoming perceptions. And this suggests that enhancing community members' involvement in local immigration could improve perceptions and attitudes. We also found that while frequency of contact did not predict attitudes and welcoming perceptions, the quality of contact did. And this highlights a need for fostering positive interactions between immigrants and members of the established community. And of course, we found that older foreign-born residents, in general, those with higher education levels and higher incomes, tended to hold more positive views. And this suggests that strategies that address and engage younger Canadian-born residents, those with lower education and income levels, could help broaden the base of support for immigrants and immigration. So knowing who holds these less favorable attitudes means maybe some strategies for targeting these people. Next slide, please. So, as you might expect, we do have several recommendations based on the findings. And the first is that if we could, it would be important to increase residents' perceived control over local immigration. This could include implementing campaigns and programs that increase their sense of control by educating them on how existing regionalization programs work. For example, the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot is community-driven in terms of setting priorities for the community. And so the community does have some control. And also involving people more actively in the settlement and integration of newcomers. So for example, community consultations. We know that many communities now have a newcomer strategy for their community, and consulting widely and hearing the voices of the members of the community may allow them to feel that they have more of a say in what's happening in their community. They have more control. Also, supporting volunteer programs, For established members of the community to interact with newcomers may be important. Now, it's important that the quality of these interactions be positive, because as we found, it's the quality of the interactions that makes a difference, not just the frequency of contact. So perhaps promoting community events such as multicultural fairs, meet your neighbors days, and programs that foster positive contact between newcomers and members of the established community can lead to more favorable attitudes. This could include, for example, community connections where people are paired with newcomers to help them navigate the community, and mentorship programs. Next slide, please. We also suggest that it's important to adopt a localized approach to address specific concerns, such as we saw in the negative comments, housing and infrastructure needs. And this can be by engaging local governments, community organizations, and other relevant parties. It's also important to debunk local myths about immigrants and immigration through media campaigns with testimonials, success stories, and economic data highlighting immigrants' contribution to the local economy, to population growth, and to social cultural landscape. So, you know, we know about the Immigration Matters campaign, also in the Atlantic, the campaign to show members of the established community about the economic contributions of newcomers, etc. And these may be important in debunking local myths about immigrants and immigration. And again, as mentioned, it's really important to target those residents who are most likely to hold negative attitudes toward immigrants and immigration in the community. For example, social media campaigns targeting young people who in this case seem to hold less favorable attitudes about the impact of immigrants and about whether immigration to their community should be encouraged. Next slide, please. And so for this part of the presentation, before we move on, this is our contact information in case you'd like to discuss anything with us after the session is complete. And now we will move on to the session, to the presentation by Peter Solman from Chatham-Kent Local Immigration Partnership.
Thank you, Alina and Victoria. My name is Peter Solman, and I am the coordinator of the Chatham-Kent Local Immigration Partnership. Next slide, please. So the Chatham-Kent Local Immigration Partnership, or CK-LIP, was established in 2010, and the municipality of Chatham-Kent holds our contract agreement with Immigration and Refugee Citizenship Canada, or IRCC. We also work closely with the Community Attraction and Promotion team and are a part of that team. And the primary objective of CK-LIP is to strengthen Chatham-Kent's capacity to welcome newcomers and improve integration outcomes. Next slide, please. This is a bit of a timeline of how Community Attraction and Promotion came to be in Chatham-Kent. Community Economic Development, or CAP, initiatives to support immigration were initiated by Municipal Council in 2007. Since 2011, these efforts have led to CAP with the aim to increase the connection that residents have to the community and strive to ensure that new residents are welcomed and choose to stay in Chatham-Kent. This work is a collaborative effort of many groups across Chatham-Kent. And it is of note that as a LIP, it's extremely beneficial to us to be so closely associated with the municipality. Next slide, please. So the Community Attraction and Promotion team does support population growth in Chatham-Kent with the intended goal of meeting local talent needs and to support a vibrant, welcoming community. We often collaborate with community partners to attract new residents by promoting Chatham-Kent and to support retention by fostering a strong, welcoming community. Next slide, please. This is just a bit of data about population trends in Chatham-Kent. And this comes from Statistics Canada census information. We can see that for 2 census periods, there was a decline in the population in Chatham-Kent. And more recently, from the recent census, we've seen that rebound or increase. We know that it's trending upwards for the next period that we're looking at. And a lot of that increase comes from intra-provincial migration. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit more focused on immigration trends in Chatham-Kent. We can see that the total immigrant population, or those that identify as immigrants, is 9,240, and that's out of about 103,000 people, or 9.1% of the population. We can also see that during that 5-year period from 2016 to 2021, Chatham-Kent had 845 new immigrants. So a lot of the growth, almost the entire growth in Chatham-Kent, is from interprovincial migration or immigrants moving to Chatham-Kent or choosing to move to Chatham-Kent. So with a little bit of that background and data, we can kind of talk about how, as a LIP and as a municipality, as a community, we strive to promote positive attitudes towards immigrants and newcomers, or the best ways that we can go about doing that. And what we have found as a LIP is that encouraging a welcoming community for immigrants and newcomers also has the added benefit of promoting those positive attitudes. Next slide, please. So one of the ways that we learn from immigrants and newcomers in Chatham-Kent is to do roughly every 3 years an immigration survey. So we asked, obviously, a myriad of questions, but this was one that kind of indicated how the immigrant population is feeling in Chatham-Kent. This is on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 obviously being negative, 10 being positive. And we asked them how welcome they feel, how connected they feel, and how valued they feel in Chatham-Kent. So another thing that we obviously want to know as a LIP and as part of the municipality is what we're doing well, what we're not doing well, or what can be improved upon. And this is obviously based on the respondents to the survey. But we can see from this that, you know, some of the things that are municipally driven are having a more positive impact. The inclusive spaces, facilities, and programs that are available. The Indigenous immigrant relations and understanding, that's a more recent push that we've had. And the commitment to anti-racism and anti-oppression. And I'll talk a little bit more about that after, but that is one of the things that we've kind of pushed more recently, and we're seeing some positive impact. But obviously it's not all positive, and we know that there are some issues and gaps that still exist. Access to transportation is a big one. We know that there were quite a few international students that responded to this survey, and we know that they're heavily reliant on public transportation. So we can see from that that's one of the issues that we need to kind of enhance or address. Employment, entrepreneurship opportunities, there can always be issues with that. So what we do from that is continue to connect with stakeholders and partners and see how we can kind of improve on that. And access to suitable healthcare and mental health. That's always an ongoing issue, unfortunately. But again, we have partners within public health and the hospitals here that we're able to kind of connect with. And if we can provide information to them, we do that whenever possible. So we do find that when we can get immigrants and newcomers involved in the community and involved in what's going on and having some kind of input and say, benefits them, but it also helps to raise the profile of newcomers in Chatham-Kent. So one of our most effective means of doing that is the Immigrant Advisory Group, or IAG. So we hold meetings roughly every 3 months. There are about 38 members representing 22 different countries. And we bring speakers in from the community, stakeholders, service providers, to kind of speak to them, let them know what they do, and then for their benefit, for the service provider benefit, to kind of get feedback on that and see how they can adapt their services to the needs of newcomers. So the service providers in Chatham County are aware that there's increasing diversity and what they can kind of do to assist with that. We find that that kind of helps promote those positive attitudes because it's there's already things going on within those service providers to kind of adapt a little bit. And it's not an immediate change, it's gradual, and we see the positive impact of that. So we do use the now 19 characteristics of a welcoming community. And when it changed to the 19 characteristics, we actually asked that immigrant advisory group if they could rank it for us for what is most important to them. Then that's just another exercise that we use to kind of get them involved so that their voices can be heard. And then we share that, within our networks and within the municipality. And we can see something that's also reflected in the survey that we did, and this was probably about a year or so apart, that employment and entrepreneurship opportunities was the top of the list. We can also see housing is there and healthcare. So these are two different groups, but it's obviously reflecting kind of the same issues and the same ongoing answers and things that we hopefully can address and kind of close the gap on. We do also see the positive attitudes towards immigrants, all racial, cultural, and religious backgrounds is an ongoing issue. And that kind of speaks to how you can promote those positive attitudes and things that we can do regarding that. But all this information kind of can go back to our community partners. And in a small community, it's a little bit easier to have those partners and to be able to, call somebody and say, we're having this issue. Is there anything that you can do to help us out? Anyone you can connect us to? And some larger communities don't necessarily have that benefit or can't bring people around the table quite as easily as you can in a smaller one. We also have obviously Welcome Week events every fall. We also have a forum every March, and that's open to the public. That's something that anyone can come to. They can learn more about immigration in Chatham-Kent. They can hear stories from local immigrants. It's kind of a connection piece that we hope helps to promote more positive attitudes in the community. We also ask them in that forum what they or their organization are doing to make Chatham-Kent more welcoming. And these are just a couple of the responses that we see that people are doing. One is from the local college and what they're doing to promote those positive attitudes. And another, I believe, was an employer who is aware and learning from that forum that they do need to have some cultural competency training. They want to train their employers. It's really by doing that, they're just making the community more welcoming for newcomers and training their staff to be aware of diverse cultural celebrations, holidays, some things that might be different from what they're used to. But in the end, it does help to promote those positive attitudes. Next slide, please. Another ongoing initiative that we have is the Chatham-Kent Welcome Network. So this is open to nonprofits, to service providers, businesses, privately owned businesses. And it's really just a means for us to share out information, share out learning opportunities, connect people. And we found that it's been extremely successful in just getting that message out to the broader community in Chatham-Kent. And I guess one example that we could share would be, one of these members was a landlord, and we had somebody locally who had lost their housing situation, and we were able to connect directly to this Welcome Network member who was the landlord, and very quickly get that was a small family into a new home. So just having that network in the small community and those established kind of connections, it really goes a long way for us. Next slide, please. So these are just some of the things that we try to do as ongoing projects and initiatives. One was a reporting hate and discrimination tool. So this came out of some meetings that we had with stakeholders after some instances of discrimination in the community. And as a LIP, we kind of connected with a partner in victim services who was able to host this tool. So as the LIP, we did a lot of the background on it. We talked to other tools that had already been established, and then we partnered with victim services to provide this online tool, which is available to the public. And it doesn't just cover discrimination or anything specific to that. It's more broad, but it was something that didn't exist in the community before. And we, as a LIP, tried to help guide that along. A couple other things that we've done are some sessions on incorporating nonprofits. The intention of that was to help some ethnocultural community groups in Chatham-Kent kind of establish themselves more formally so that they could host events in the community, and that could be open to the public. They could kind of grow their own cultural foundation in Chatham-Kent. And all of that goes a long way to fostering a more welcoming community and then helping to increase their visibility in the community. And we do ongoing research projects. One of them was a temporary foreign worker project. So as a municipality, we were part of the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program, and this was opened in July of 2020. And we received 67 applications for that. And this just kind of relates to the need for municipal buy-in to the things that we're doing, how kind of their networks and their support really help to promote those positive attitudes. I don't think we'd be anywhere near as successful as we are if we didn't have that backing of the municipality and our municipal partners. We find the municipality has always been a very proactive player in this space that we're in. You know, they hold our contract, they applied to have a LIP and to host that. And, you know, as a small community, it really enhances the work that we can do and enhances our outreach. A lot of what we do goes to council, and we can kind of promote our work to council, and that reaches the broader community. So it really just, you know, fostering the welcoming community for immigrants and newcomers really just goes a long way to promoting more positive attitudes. And as with that municipal partner, we've seen great success. Next slide, please. This is just a link to our website and community attraction promotion website with QR codes, livingck.ca and Chatham Kent LIP. You're welcome to explore those. And that is everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And now it's an opportunity for everyone who's here today to ask questions or make comments or to participate. And what we would ask is that you do raise hand. You can see the little icon at the bottom of the screen. Turn on your camera, please, if you're going to speak. And we welcome comments, questions, anything you want to discuss. I think this is an issue that's dear to the hearts of many of us. Myrna.
Hello, this is Myrna in Kelowna, BC. And I work on the Connector program for the Local Economic Development Commission. So that's a program that helps newcomers of any newcomer try and get connected to professionals in the community in the sector of work that they'd like to work in, to just build professional networks, because we know, you know, people get jobs lots of times by who they know, not just what they know. My question is around getting the municipality on board, because obviously these things take funding and dollars, and so the Economic Development Commission actually is funded by the local governments. But yeah, I'd be interested to hear, Peter, more about, you know, did it take convincing of the municipality, or was there a driver at the council level, or like who drove it?
Thanks, Myrna. That's a great question. I will say that was long before I was in the role. But we do have a large council in Chatham-Kent. The population is pretty small, but there's about 17 or so councillors. And there's a lot of smaller communities. Chatham-Kent amalgamated in 1998, I believe. So a lot of representation there. Council's always been on board with that, and Chatham-Kent for a long time did have either a stagnant or kind of declining population. So, and even when we look at the numbers now, the entire population growth comes from newcomers coming into the community. So I believe council and administration saw that as a great way to, increase the population, to increase business, to increase housing, tax base, obviously. And there's never really been anything negative that we've heard. You might have some voices that aren't exactly on board, but there's never been any pushback from the municipality. They're happy with all the work that we do. Our mayor attends almost every event that we ask him to attend, and he's always pushing the positivity of Chatham-Kent. I don't know the exact process of how you would get your municipality involved or more on board, but it certainly does help. I won't say that it doesn't. And just having that really helps enhance our work. I don't know if that answers your questions, but I wasn't around for for when it started, unfortunately.
No, I appreciate that. I just, so Kelowna is in a bit of a different state because our population is the fastest growing municipality in Canada, or one of, and so yeah, it's a bit of spin on this, but I really appreciate some of the things that you've said that you're doing, and I think they could be incorporated here quite easily. But yeah, so I appreciate the feedback. Thank you. And I'm not saying that our council isn't, but we don't have the kind of programs that I see that you have, and I think some of them are really awesome.
Right. I think it might have been seen somewhat as a need in Chatham-Kent, so there wasn't a lot of pushback on it.
Thank you. And Peter, I don't know if you noticed in the chat, somebody asked whether there's an email address they can reach out to you. If you don't mind, maybe you could just respond to that.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jennifer.
Thank you. Sorry. Hi, my name is Jennifer. I'm the new LIP in Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories, and I'm new to the role, but not to Yellowknife, so I am aware of a lot of the issues that we're facing. But the first thing I'd like to comment on is just how valuable this research is for me, coming from a very small and isolated community, because I'm always looking for ways to do research, and I've always focused on newcomers, but this research is interesting because it also looks at what the community attitudes are, and I never really considered that perspective, but this really puts an interesting lens on your research, because now it's I see that there's much more opportunity to gauge, not just from the community of newcomers, but from the community of Yellowknife itself. So I just want to say thank you for that, because it's hopefully it'll help guide my research in the future. And yeah, I think that engaging with newcomers is always important, but this is great, and I think I'll be trying to reach out to both Alina and Victoria to get a little more information on your research so that I can use it to help me out here. So I just want to say thank you, and really great research. Very well done.
Thank you. Other comments, questions? Liz?
Hi, I'm calling in from ISS at BC. I am in Vancouver, so I'm kind of cheating by being here because we are a larger community, but working with skilled newcomers, trying to get them back into their pre-arrival occupations. But yeah, it was really interesting to hear some of the insights from the local populations, because I don't think that, I think if we interviewed a larger population in the bigger cities, we would still have some of the same feedback that you got from your information. And I just wanted to share a resource. I think I'll pop it in the chat, but AMSA, they released their provincial report a couple of weeks ago about how to strengthen newcomer integration into the province, so in all communities. But it was really interesting because they've got some great statistics that counter some of those beliefs about the housing shortages, about the taking of jobs and all of that kind of stuff. So it might be really interesting for, if people are interested, of course, to read the report and see what the actual evidence of that is, and to use some of that to try to break down some of these misnomers that we have about newcomers and strengthen their impact in the community.
Thank you. That's great. And I think those myths are, they're challenging to counteract, because people also don't like to think that they're wrong. So conveying these messages, this information, for example, the statistics you're talking about, in a way that is convincing and not threatening is really important. Other comments or questions? Stephanie, please.
There we go. I'm actually with the CKLIP as well, but don't worry, Peter, my question is not directed at you, but rather Victoria and Alina's research. I really liked the comment you said frequency of contact did not promote welcoming perceptions, but rather the quality of contact. And I think that's really important and something that we're working on when developing activities and programs and just community facing events and whatnot. You did mention community connections. I'm just wondering if you have more of a practical example of what that looks like, so we can maybe be inspired or pick up on your idea.
Yeah, I was thinking of settlement agencies having community connections where they link newcomers with established members of the community to show them the community. So it's one of the IRCC programs that actually makes those connections. And I also see those connections being made at, say, universities where international students and students who are domestic students will be brought together to just get to know each other and learn from each other, and kind of, the international students will kind of learn more about Canadian ways of doing things. And, young people really want to fit in. So it's important that they kind of know how things are working in their local community. And then the members of the established community or the domestic students, they learn, about some of the cultures and, issues that the international students are facing. And so form more empathy and relationships. So I think anything that really brings people together in a positive way.
I like that. Thank you.
Thanks. Other comments or questions? Kevin.
Yeah, hi there. Kevin Driedger. I'm with Pembina Valley Local Immigration Partnership here in southern Manitoba. I was fascinated by the research, and I was I will admit to being surprised at the minimal difference. The questions about whether if the newcomer was not white or not Christian, and kind of I can't remember exactly how the questions were framed. I was surprised that there wasn't a starker difference that the non-Christian or the non-white didn't go further down. And I mean, how one words surveys is always a challenge, because I wonder what the response would be is, instead of saying not Christian, is a Muslim, whether that response would get a different response than sort of the generic not a Christian. Because so my I just think, sort of anecdotally, the experience of my lovely white Christian American immigrant wife and of some local Muslims in this area, it sure seems like it's pretty distinctly different, their reception. So yeah, so I was just surprised that what at least that felt difference wasn't sort of really reflected in the survey results.
Well, Alina, those results were statistically different, right?
Correct, yeah. There were statistically, yeah.
Yeah, so even though they're small differences, they
Mhm.
are reliable differences.
Mhm, mhm.
And I think we didn't want to pick out one group, but
Yeah.
of course, you know, there are also, for example, Sikhs in our community
Mhm.
who are seen less favorably.
Yeah.
I'm sure if we had actually mentioned groups, it would have
Mhm.
brought up more negative perceptions, but
Mhm. Okay.
yeah, thank you.
Yep. Thanks.
Other comments, questions, things you think we should do next? Things you think we could talk about next? Research that needs to be done in Chatham-Kent or across the country, or I actually have a question for you, Peter, about the victim services reporting tool. So, you know, I think a reporting tool is really important. Do people have to identify themselves? It's something we hear about, that people are hesitant to report if they have to say who they are.
They do not. They don't even have to provide any contact information if they choose not to. That there is the option, do you need emergency services? There is the option, do you need further support? Which is a lot of what victim services does. But no, there's no identifying themselves. There's really just, they can put the bare minimum, but they do have to say kind of what it is, what happened, what they are reporting. But that was something we discussed. Yeah, do we have the need to ask people that, or do we just give them the option and see what support they feel comfortable getting? And it's been successful going that route.
And have you thought about collating the data and then reporting back to the community what the numbers are?
Yes. So I guess it's about a year in now. We had I think 6 months in, we heard a little bit of the data, but we were waiting until, you know, it had been up and running for a little bit. But yeah, that's something that we plan to do at some point soon.
Fantastic. Thank you. Kat.
Hi there, Kat Fisher Andrews from Quinte Local Immigration Partnership in Southern Ontario area. I also have a question for Peter about I guess it's a racism reporting tool. We have an anti-racism committee at our QLIP, and we've been talking about this type of tool, and great idea to partner with victim services. Thank you for that. Didn't even really occur to me. We were thinking more police, but then we were like, that doesn't really work for a lot of people. I guess my question for you is, have you had any feedback about whether people prefer to report online, or whether they prefer to report in person or speak to someone? Has there been any feedback about how that works? Because that's been a conversation we've been having.
Thanks, Kat. Yeah, no, that's something that was discussed as well. We identified that some people might be hesitant to contact something hosted by the police directly, especially immigrants and newcomers. There can be some hesitancy there. So we didn't want to do that. We do know that Victim Services has a relationship with the Chatham-Kent Police Services. But, you know, it was a little more of an intermediary there. As far as online versus, say, a phone call or in person, so as I said before, there's that option of the support, right? So if they want that support in person, they can click a button and it says it will give their information to victim services. So they have that option. Because again, we didn't want to put anyone on the spot. And we wanted to make sure that that support was available to them if they wanted it. So it's, I can share the link if you want to, you could go through and kind of see how that works. That might help. And again, there is also the, do you need immediate assistance option? And that would go to the police. So we didn't necessarily do all of that because we weren't the experts in that, victim services were, but they did a fantastic job.
Awesome, thank you. It's great.
Thank you, Peter. Juan.
Hey guys, thank you so much. I'm Juanito Rivas. I am the Capital Region Integration Network Coordinator for the Capital Region of New Brunswick's Local Immigration Partnership. And I had a question for, I guess, for Victoria and Alina. So one of the slides mentioned that, you know, one of the negative or perceived negative aspects of immigration, especially in rural or like smaller communities, is the perception of the erosion of Canadian values, right? Like, and the slide mentioned a forced like how can I put this? That the population might sense that like they have to learn other values and it's forced upon them rather than they wanting to like take the initiative. Like they're forced to learn about different like other religions other than Christianism, right, or Catholicism. And I was just wondering if there's any data that like actually measures like that, maybe the hesitancy when it comes to engaging with immigrants, because you know, like one of the ways in which you would solve that is that community engagement piece. And I think it was Stephanie that asked, like, you know, a more practical thing, like cultural bridging is a very useful tool. People can bond over food, they can bond over sports, right? But like I wonder if like there's any data that actually shows how hesitant are like how hesitant is the domestic population to jump to those opportunities to begin with, right? And that's just like on an anecdotal note, like just talking to, you know, friends and just people in the community, especially Canadian born, you know, that are not like racialized people. There's the, you know, they want to avoid things like, you know, cultural appropriation or anything like that. So is there any data that like shows, okay, how hesitant are people to, you know, engage to begin with?
I mean, I would say that we looked, before we started with this research, we looked through the literature a bit to see what's the status in smaller communities, what would we expect to see. And there are some studies that we've come across that talk exactly about some of the things that you also mentioned now, that these concerns about if not being exposed to much diversity, how is that going to affect me? Maybe it's going to be the change is too fast all of a sudden. So it really speaks to that, what you're saying, that there is this initial concern and how do you bridge that gap? And then I guess from my perspective, what I would say is that even in terms of the recommendations, when we talk about things that we can do, these programs, community connections programs, maybe it's for some people too much to even commit at the beginning to an extensive program like that. But this is where then events, community events that are just maybe a starting point could be very helpful, because you meet maybe for a multicultural fair. So it's just little pieces of like or small activities that can break the ice. And I think it's bit by bit that then this approachment can happen. So if a whole program seems maybe too overwhelming, yeah, maybe create events that are just not as threatening, maybe. And it's just you can slowly get to know the other person, and then with increased contact and quality contact, yeah, we can see improvements. I'm not sure, Vicky, if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think that's a great answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just basically make it as less daunting as possible in the beginning.
Exactly.
And then just have the difficulty, if you will. Yeah.
You're not overwhelmed, I guess, you know, just start small. And if it's a larger event where the whole community comes out, then yeah, I think that could help.
Thank you.
Great. Other comments, questions? Kevin, please.
Sorry, me again. And this is just, I will be curious, however, as our neighbors to the south head into an election time, and as rhetoric changes or, you know, gets amped up there, as well as in our own country, how in the next 2 years, if, yeah, how, you know, yeah, I'm curious about if how attitudes might be changing in the next few years.
Yeah, we've already seen, I think, that attitudes have become less favorable overall in some of the national Canadian surveys. And partly, I'm sure, the influence of media, wherever that media is coming from. Partly the threat, the sense of threat. But yeah, it will be really interesting to see what happens in the next couple of years.
Yep.
Thank you for that. So maybe on that note, we can end here. I just want to say that our contact, Peter's contact, is available. And if you have other comments, questions, you want to explore further, you want to see the victim services reporting tool, they're all available. And our PowerPoints, again, will be posted in the next 24 hours or so. And of course, Peter's contact, I think, is in the chat here as well. So thank you everybody for participating. And as Alina said, we will be holding these events the third Tuesday of every month moving forward. So thank you for coming, and we welcome further comments via email or what have you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.